Welcome back, everybody, to another week of data visualization in Python with charming data. So this week we're going to focus on the strip plot that you see right in front of you, also commonly known as the dot plot. We're going to look at suicidal data across generations from different years, and we're going to learn all the different things we can do with a strip plot. So we're going to look at the x-axis, how we're going to plot the y-axis. We're going to look at adding a legend with, in this case, different colors and different genders. We're going to look at how to manipulate the colors. We are going to see how to create a horizontal strip plot, how to create overlays so they're not one by the other, but they're one on top of the other. We're going to see how to put everything in rows or in columns and rows. We're also going to look at how to trace everything, the y-axis on a logarithm scale, so you can actually see very extreme points. We're going to create hovers, so you can also look at that, and different templates with different titles. And lastly, we're going to create animation dot plot where you can click play with the years and you'll see all the strip plots moving according to the years that you chose. So all of this, very exciting. We are actually going to use data that's not very exciting, but it's very good to plot on this graph. It's suicidal data. So this data is from 1987 all the way to 2010, I think, and we'll use these different columns. I think we'll use sex, year, country, and suicide rate is going to be the y-axis per 100,000 people. Population of 100,000 people, and the generation, which generation it is. Now, make a note of the fact that the generation is right here. So you'll see it's called GI generation. They were born from 1901 to 1927. Silent was born from 28 to 45, and so on and so on. I will go in here, open the links below the video. There's 2 or 3 links in there that will help you follow along. The first link is a Plotly Express strip, and they give you all the parameters that we're actually going to review. So you can learn how to do this on your own with any type of data after this video. And below the link, there's also the code. So click on that below the video and open it so you can follow along. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to import these libraries because we need pandas to play around with the data frame, with the data, and we're going to use Plotly Express, which is a very strong Python library to create pretty much any type of graph that you want. This is the version that I installed. Sorry, let's do this but you can install similar versions. I think it would work. All right, so the next thing you want to do is right here in between these lines, we're actually going to filter the data. So the first thing is we're going to read the data into a pandas data frame. We're going to map it because in the Excel sheet it's called GI generation. The generation column has all these values in it, all these rows, but I want it to be called GI generation 1901 to 1927, and silent, I want it to be called silent 28 to 45. Because I want to give you the different years of what each generation, when they were born, when is that each generation considered. So I'm going to create this dictionary of map, and then I'm going to change the df generation column so it has these new values in there with the years. We're going to go over this later. This is just to draw a few graphs. The only thing we're going to do right now is we're going to group the whole data by sex, country, and generation. So notice that we are leaving the year out. We don't care about the year. We just care about these. And then the mean, the average of the suicide rates per 100,000 people in each country. So if you print this out, this is what you come out with. Sex, female, country, Albania, and then you have a row for each generation, and you also have male below, row for each generation, and then the suicide rate for that generation over the years. So from 1987 to 2010, it was an average suicide rate of 2.2 per 100,000 people for the boomers in Albania female, and so on and so on. You have all countries and all the generations. Sorry, and all the sexes. Okay, so now that we filter the data and we have it grouped, now we can actually do the strip figure, okay? So it's going to go all the way down here, we're going to do all this. It ends here, but we'll go one by one so you know actually what we're doing. Call the strip method on Plotly Express and open your parentheses. The first thing parameter you want to use is data frame. So go with, the data frame is obviously the df because that is what we're using. The y-axis is going to be the generation. The x-axis is generation. The y-axis is the suicide rate. And then the category orders, I'm just going to reorder them because they're not ordered, they're not pre-ordered in the database of the generation column. And so I want to order it this way, so when I go into the graph, it starts, the left starts from GI generation and it goes all the way, the last one is generation Z that was born in 96 to 2012. If your data is already ordered that way, you don't need it, but mine wasn't, so that's how I ordered it. And I'm just going to add hover country. So this is the first graph that you're actually creating. All these are hashtag out, so they're not useful right now. And this is what you create with the first line of code. Again, the generation on the x-axis, the suicide rate, and all the countries are in here. Each you have for I think each generation you have female and male. So you have Hungary female here. Well, it won't say, but one of them is female, and somewhere in here you also have, you see Hungary male as well, because we didn't divide up the sexes. But if we want to divide up and create a legend where we categorize by gender, now you'll have a very beautiful chart of male, female in blue, and the rates per country. To do that, you would have to go to color sex, because sex is the column of the Excel sheet right here, right? So just add, make that the value of the parameter color, and that's how you create that graph. I'm going to save that, and if you run it, this graph would be created. Okay, so now the next thing you want to do is, oh, don't forget the hover country. This is hover data as a parameter. We added the country column, so that is why right here when you hover over it, you see country Lithuania, country Hungary, and so on, Lithuania, and so on and so on. But that's only because you have this. The next chart we're going to create is playing around with a color. So there's two ways to play around with a color. The first one is to use the color discrete synquence parameter. And this is just tells you that it sets a specific marker color for the discrete values. The sex is discrete because it's only female and male. It's not continuous. And I know I have two different values, male and female, so I'm going to have to put two different colors. I chose this color, spring green and yellow, because I just felt like it. You can just go into here and see, this is also below the video, all these colors are CSS colors, they're inside Plotly, so you can choose any color you want. Okay, so since I chose spring green and yellow, this is the one that came up. Now, I didn't know which one was female, which one was male. This parameter just tells you that the first one is going to be spring green and the second one is going to be yellow. If you have a lot of values under your legend and you can't remember which one comes first or second, then don't use this parameter. Use the color discrete map. So you can map the values of the legend to the color that you want. So now I want male to be rosy brown and I want female to be orange red. And if you save this and you execute it, you will come up with this graph. Orange brown, and orange red, and what was it? Yellowy rose. I can't even remember those cool color names. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, let's hashtag this out. So now we're just with color sex. We're going to get the default colors of Plotly, which I think are orange and blue. And we're going to say make it instead of vertical, make it horizontal. So you have to do, there's only two options here, vertical, horizontal. We're going to choose horizontal. If you do it horizontal, you also got to change the Y and X axis values, because now they're different. Now it's upside down. So you got to change that as well. And if you run it, now you would get this horizontal, where the y-axis is the generation, the x-axis is the suicide rate, and these are the default colors of blue and red in Plotly. Okay, so the next chart we're going to look at is an overlay. You see, before we did group, so one sex was by the other, female was by male. There's another way you can do overlay, so they're one on top of the other. So if you actually go into it, choose a closer time or a closer rate, you'll see they're one above the other, or you can double click and pull out of it. So that's another way of looking at the graph. To do that, all you have to do, let's go back to the normal, bring it back to generation, bring it back to vertical. I'm going to hashtag this out because by default this is vertical, and by default this is group, but I want to change it to overlay. So if you change it to overlay, there's only two options here, overlay and group. If you change it to overlay, you will get this graph, all that you see here, that you can play around with. All right. So I'm going to bring it back to group because we want group. And actually, I'm going to hashtag this out because by default is group, so you don't need that. And now we're going to go into facets. So now we're going to see how to create these 4 different rows because we have 4 different years. What do I mean by this? How do we create rows? So let's say I have more data. Here in the data frame, I don't. I only have sex, country, generation, and these. But let's say I had year in my data frame as well. So let's take this out and let's hashtag these in because this filtering of the data frame is going to filter by year. I'm taking all the rows that have these years. I'm going to choose only these years. And then I'm going to group all the new data frame the same way I grouped this one, but I'm going to add year to it. So now I have another column that I didn't have before. Now, I don't have space for the year column here. I'm using X for generation, Y for suicide rates. I'm using color for sex, so I don't have space for year. So for year, I'm going to put on the facet row year. And that way, I'll be able to see per year, each row per year. All right. And since we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 years, that I on purpose I limited it to 4 years, so I don't have like 20 different rows. Since I have 4 years, I'll have 4 different rows, as you can see here, year 92, 93, 94, 95. And if these years are not in order, you can just categorize them by using this category orders parameter. Okay, so let's say I don't want to do by row, but I want to do by column, just on hashtag this, and now you have this facet call parameter assigns marks to subplots in the horizontal direction. In other words, it's creating columns. If I do this right now, let's just make sure I'm doing this correctly. Let me just save and run it, and let's see if it's actually creating what we think it's supposed to create. Give it 1 second. Okay, you see, so it's creating this, which is year per column, 92, 93, all the way to 95, and the x-axis stays the same. So it's a really cool way to compare between the different years. And what can I see? For example, that here the boomers, where Lithuania was close to 150 suicide rate per 100,000, when they were not even close in prior years. So something happened in 95 where Lithuania really jumped, and there was a very high number of suicide rates for the boomers. Another way you can compare data is if you have facet call wrap. This is a very important parameter. If you have too many years, let's say you have 20 years, and you don't want to see 20 different columns, you can say divide all the data that I have, or all the columns that I have, by 2, or maybe divide it by 4. And that is the number of rows you're going to get according to the number of values that you have. So in this case, let's close this. In this case, we have 4 columns, so if I divide by 2, I'm going to have 2 and 2 from 1992, 2 years on top and 2 years on the bottom. If I had 10 different years, I would probably have 5 and 5, unless I divided by 3 or something else. All right, so this is how you create columns and rows, either separately, rows, columns, or either together, columns and rows. If you have any questions about this, please go below the video, add any comments, hit the like button, and I'll be more than happy to answer anything you want. All right, so the next column is how to do logarithm, how to trace your y-axis in a logarithm manner. I'm not an expert on logarithm. I just know that a lot of scientists and analysts like to use it because it allows you to see extreme data points. So if you have a suicide rate that's like 2 out of 100,000 population, and another one that's 1,500, you would be able to see it on a logarithm scale. So to do this, all you have to do is let's bring this back to normal. Hashtag these out. Hashtag this out as well because we don't want year anymore. We just want the sex, country, and generation. So you have all this, and then just go back to logarithm y on hashtag this, and this is how you get this graph. If you want to do the same thing on X, you would just do you would hashtag this out and unhashtag this, and you would have on X. Here it doesn't make any sense because it's not a continuous value; it's just discrete. So there's no point in using logarithm on discrete values. Okay, so let's hashtag this out. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to look at other things you can actually add. Hover name and hover data. So they're very similar. Hover data will add values as extra data to the hover tooltip. And the hover name, if you choose the column name here, it will actually appear in bold above the tooltip. So what does this mean? It means that this is the hover name. You see how Lithuania is bold on top? That's because I put hover name country. But you see on the bottom how it says country equals Lithuania? That's because I use hover data. The bottom, country equals Lithuania, is because we use this. The top, where it's bold, Lithuania is bold, is because we use this. Custom data, I go over this in other graphs that I've created, the bar chart, the pie chart, the scatter. This is just information that you can have the app keep in memory in the back end. So if you need to access more data that's not traced on the graph, you now have access to it. So now every dot, you can't see it, but every dot that a user might choose or click on would also have the data of population, because we added it here, in the memory. So it's not going to be in the hover, but it's going to be in the memory. So if you ever have to talk about the population or refer to the population, you have it in the memory. Okay, so let's hashtag these out because we don't need them right now. And now we're going to focus on a whole different template, and we're going to do this. So if you save this and you just hashtag this back in, you will get this chart, right? Now look at this chart. You have a title, you have a generation in capital letter as opposed to generation in small letters. You have a whole different template, a whole different background color, and it's smaller. So you did this, or we did this, by doing this. We said title is suicide rate. This is the size, pixel-wise, the graph that we want. We use the Seaborn template. There's many different templates you can use here, so feel free. I like the Plotly Dark or the regular default, which I think is Plotly, but Seaborn is also a cool template. And the labels, this is a way to map the labels. You can change labels on your graph. So it's just a dictionary of key and value. The key is the value the key is the string that already exists. So I know sex exists, but I don't want to see sex, I want to see gender. So that's why in the original one it said sex, and after I added the labels, now it's gender. Okay, because I changed that from sex to gender. And generation I changed from small letters to capital letters. Okay, let's hashtag this out. The last thing we're going to learn is how to do animation. So hashtag this. This comes after the parentheses. Okay, there's not with the parentheses. This is after the graph is the strip plot is closed. And the animation, let's hashtag these back in. We're not going to use these two right here. They're not necessary for this graph. But we're going to go over animation frame year and range Y. Animation frame year is going to create this. We are creating an animated dot plot with these years, 92 to 95, with the play button and the stop button, and every time you hit play, these dots are going to move according to the year. Don't forget that because it's year here, I'm going to make sure that I hashtag this data frame out, because this doesn't give me years when I filtered it. I'm going to use the other filter, which gives me years. So this one gives me sex, country, generation, and year. So make sure to use this data frame and not this data frame. Okay. So now I have the years column, and I'm going to say do everything as usual. X is generation, Y axis is suicide, sex is color, but also add the year to the animation frame. So every year there's going to be it's a different animation. We know that we have 4 different years. You can add more if you want, and that's what it's good. That's why we're going to have 4 different years. And you want to set the axis of the y-axis in this case, because if not, it jumps around. So if you know the highest dot is probably like 180 or 190, and the lowest is somewhere around 0, so just set it from 0 to 190 so it doesn't bounce around. It's same thing with y-axis. If you have different values, now it's discrete, so it doesn't matter. But if you have a lot of values in the y-axis, make sure you set the range of the y-axis as well. This last thing allows you to play. This is way deep inside the data. You can try and print this and see what it gives you, but I did it for you. Is you have to go deep inside the data to change the duration of each frame. So 1,000 milliseconds means 1 second. There's going to take 1 second between year to year. For you to move from 92 to 93 is going to take 1 second, 93 to 94 another second. So if I bring this back here, we'll see play. We'll see how this moves. 1 second. 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Oops, wait, and 3 seconds. Yeah. So you see how cool it is, how it moves around, and you can see the different animated dots, how they move. Now, in this case, there might be too many dots to actually animate it, and maybe too many generations. So now that you have the data, now that you know how to do all this, play around with it. Change things, change your generations, filter the data frame so you only have 2, or maybe you only have 1 gender, only female. And then play around with the animated portion of this, because almost every plotly graph has an animated portion. So if you know how to manipulate this here, you know how to do it in the other graphs as well. I have other videos with other graphs, so feel free to go into the playlist above that talks about the different plotly graphs that I'm going over. Every week we're going to go over a different plot. Every week we're going to go over a different interactive capability as well, using Dash that would allow you to play around with drop downs and checkboxes and date pickers. So subscribe below, turn on your notifications so you can get notified when I come up with a new video, and make the best of it. Thank you. Have a good day.